in this little brief presentation, but I do want to go over how we're going to be interacting on this session tonight. So I'm just hosting. I'm going to actually pass off the moderating torch in a second here to Dr. Jalan White Newsome, and she's going to be handling the logistics from here. But in the meantime, I want to make sure that you're in the right place. So this session is Community Voices in EJ Town Hall on Rebuilding Trust, Reimagining Justice, and Removing Barriers. So we're really excited to talk about the theme of the Environmental Justice Conference tonight. So the first thing that I want to do is just make sure everybody knows that your lines are going to be muted during the session tonight, but we are going to be recording this. So if you have to leave early, or you just really want to watch the session over again, or any of the other sessions, we've already recorded and posted them for you. So you should be good to go there. If you want to ask a question of the panelists tonight, go ahead and put your question in the question and answer box, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. But I think as folks have been experiencing the other sessions, they're a little bit short. So we're going to try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So that means I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to pass the baton over to you, Dr. Jalan White Newsome, and you can introduce yourself and the rest of the panel. So thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jennifer. So good evening and welcome to everyone for this town hall on rebuilding trust, reimagining justice, and removing barriers. My name again is Jalan White Newsome, and that's a lot, so you can call me Dr. J for short. And I am CEO and founder of Empowering a Green Environment and Economy, a strategic consulting firm based in Southeastern Michigan. So before we get into this conversation, I want to acknowledge my ancestors that made it possible for me to be here, and the fact that I'm calling from my home on the original lands of the Potawatomi. So I don't know about you, but this conference has been amazing. It has been informational. It has been illuminating many of the challenges that we face in this great state of ours, but also all of the potential that we have, regardless of where you sit and what position you hold. And so when I think about that potential, we can transform systems and institutions in a way that all communities will ultimately be able to achieve and experience true environmental justice. And so when we think about achieving true environmental justice, based on what I learned from working in DC on federal EJ policy, and maybe a little bit from playing basketball at Renaissance High School in Detroit, you got to have a strong outside game as well as a strong inside game. And so really based on this lineup, I hope you would agree over the past day and a half, almost 2 days, the outside game of community advocates and grassroots organizations is strong here in Michigan. I mean, you have folks that are smart, passionate, and that continue to have influence, not only in the state of Michigan, but even beyond. But what's just as important is having a strong inside game. So you have to have advocates within these agencies that are working within the system, leaders that aren't afraid to do things different and not just the way it's been done for 20 or 30 years, but also folks that can take bold action, like, for instance, hosting the state's first Environmental Justice Conference. And so from what I've seen, and I do believe that the inside game at Eagle is strong, and particularly with these 4 women at the helm. So with that, I want to introduce our panelists for this evening. Regina Strong, who is the Environmental Justice Public Advocate for Eagle. Lisa Clark, who is the Director of Eagle. Marianne Delahanty, which is the Air Quality Division Director for Eagle. And then Nina Sassy, who was formerly the Clean Water Public Advocate for Eagle, but is now serving as the Executive Director of the Michigan Infrastructure Coalition. So our format for this evening is conversational. Each panelist will provide some brief reflections on a couple of questions, but then we really want to make space for you as much as we can in this virtual town hall format. So again, we want you to utilize all the functionality, whether it's Whova or Q&A. Again, we want to hear your voice. Now, again, we can't promise that we're going to get to every question, but please get it in the queue and we will try to build a good conversation around those questions as much as we can. So with that, maybe I'll have Lisa kick us off with our first question. So reflecting on this conference theme, and really from your perspective as director, Lisa, can you share tangible ways that you are taking action in your role that either relate to rebuilding trust, reimagining justice, or removing barriers?
Thank you, Dr. J. It's a great question, and I appreciate you being willing to moderate this panel, and I appreciate the experience and background that you bring to the conversation that we had tonight and to the other work that we've had the great benefit or great pleasure of doing together. So thank you. It's a great question, and it's interesting because in the background of the Environmental Justice Conference playing out this week, my day job, so to speak, in the course of that work, I've been having a lot of conversations about rebuilding trust and communications. So much of the trust that's necessary and the communications that's necessary is at the heart of the work that we do. So when we think about, the permitting work that we do, we think about kind of the nuts and bolts of the programmatic work. We can't do that to our fullest extent if we don't have trust, and we don't have trust if we are not communicating well. And so I very much identify with the tenets of this conference, and I find it to be, frankly, what I'm doing on a day in and day out basis. Now, that being said, trust is a tough thing. And I saw my job as director when I first came on as my first effort was to build trust with the 1,200 fantastic public servants that work at Eagle, because I needed to have their trust in order to take them along a journey to encourage greater communication with the people that we serve. And so what I did at an outset was I had listening sessions with the entire department in small groups where we were, 10 to 20 people in a room, because I needed their trust in order for us to work together to earn your trust to a greater extent. I also want to say that none of these things are binary. There is not you have trust or you do not have trust. Often it's along a continuum. And my goal as a director is to push that continuum further. And I think that, this is a wonderful team to be able to do that with. And I think one of the places where our trust has a tendency to move in the wrong direction on the continuum is because we at the department are not able, because of time, resources, and other things, to correctly articulate to the 10 million people that we serve what we do and what we're able to do. I often use air quality as an example, which is apropos for this discussion. I say the 10 million people in the state of Michigan that we serve expect that I can look out my window right now and tell you what that Eagle can tell you the air quality outside my window right now. And when we only have 42, 45 monitors, Marianne will correct me, in the state, and we have 83 counties just as a starting point, that that's not true. And so we need to do a better job, and this is a tough task. We need to do a better job to build that trust by helping explain what it is we as a department can do and what we can't do. And then we together as a community can go to the legislature and say we need more resources because we want the department to deliver us X goals. So anyway, I've already gone too long. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to the voices on this panel and to hearing from all of you through your questions. And I'm grateful for you being here.
Awesome. Thank you, Lisa. And so maybe Marianne, because air quality came up, do you want to speak a little bit to your reflections on the theme?
Sure, I can do that. I'm just so encouraged that these conversations are happening. This week, as many of you know too, is challenging. It's very busy for me. We've got the EJ conference. I've got participating virtually. It's the beauty of being able to participate virtually because I can be in 3 places at once. Participating in our National Air Association has their spring membership conference this week. And then on Thursday, tomorrow, I'll be speaking at an MMA and state bar event related to clearing the air. So I bring that up because it's kind of the full package in some ways. We're talking EJ, and it's such a huge priority right now, which is amazing. And I'm so thankful that we're at this point. And then you get together with your counterparts from other states who are participating in the NACA conference, and we're hearing from our EPA counterparts as well about what a priority EJ is for this administration. And how they're trying to move it to the forefront of all their decision making and make it part of their culture. I say that that's what we're doing here in Michigan too. And so we're learning then from counterparts in other states related to, maybe California, New Jersey, or Virginia, or Minnesota, who have already implemented some type of environmental justice in their decision making. What are they doing? How can we bring that to Michigan? And then to kind of close things off, tomorrow I'll be talking to lawyers and consultants and industry reps about what our priorities are within air quality, and emphasizing the fact that those priorities include environmental justice. We have been engaged with it for many, many years in air quality. We're not perfect and we have a long way to go, but we are definitely open to change and open to incorporating some of those principles and continuing to incorporate them into our day-to-day work. I looked at, one of the things from you mentioned, so that's tangible, kind of what am I doing this week? But one of the things that I talk to in terms of like new employees that may come into our agency or our air quality division, I always say, be curious, ask why. Why do we do something the way we do? Don't just accept it if it doesn't make sense. Can it be improved? What can we do to make it better? I always say, be creative, be curious, be present. Be a sponge. One of the things I emphasize is we need to listen to people, not just hear them. When we hear people, we use the mechanics of our ears. But when we listen, we're using our brain, and when we listen and we use that brain, we're challenging ourselves at times as to what we believe. The other day I heard somebody say something that really stuck with me too. And it's like, you may never sit in the shade of the tree that you plant today, but plant it anyway. And I thought that is such a great comment. It's like, you don't have to be in the biggest position to have the biggest impact. We can all do that. And that's, again, one of the things I emphasize with our new staff, and having these conversations today, in this week with the EJ conference, and then continuing those conversations with all of those stakeholders, emphasizing the importance is something that I hold dear.
Awesome. I think that's so important about what you do, but also how you do it. So Nina, do you want to share some reflections?
Yes, definitely. So in thinking about the theme of the conference, to me, it's really the foundation of the work that we should be doing. It's not one more thing we're doing. Our work should be built on these principles. And so in just thinking about the work that I previously did as a clean water public advocate, it was really about creating space to make sure that we had those community voices at the table. We were getting their perspective. We had an understanding of some of the barriers and things that we needed to address within the state. One example of that is just the Clean Water Ambassador Initiative, where we had at least 160 folks across the state representing urban and rural communities that were really proactive in saying, hey, here are the issues that we're facing on a day-to-day basis. These are things that we have questions about. And then taking that back and thinking about how can we improve the work that we're doing? How can we improve our outreach and education? What are some policies and things that we need to keep in, that we may need to revise based on what we're hearing from these community voices? So it's really about creating that space for two-way communication and making sure that you're not talking at people, that you're listening. One thing my mom always says, you have to listen. You sit back and listen. And then, don't think of what you're going to say as people are talking to. So I think that's the key, is really creating that space to listen to people and appreciate their perspective. I think, again, as we think about the initiatives and things that we do in our work on a day-to-day basis, we have folks at the table that have, what we perceive as the expertise. We have our engineers, we have public health, we have all of our different skill sets that we bring to the table. But what we don't have is the perspective and lived experience of community residents. And that should be what really guides our work in making sure that we're doing it in a meaningful way. Another quick example, and again, I'm not going to take up all the space here, is that I'm really proud of the work that we were able to do in Benton Harbor, and I think that was because of the relationships that we had at the community level. Faith-based leaders there and community leaders there are really active and they want to be involved in the process. So utilize those connections. They should be a part of what we're doing. Let them be an extension of what we do on a day-to-day basis. It adds capacity to what we're doing. And also, again, that different lens that we may not have. So that's what I think in terms of just overall, this is something that foundationally we have to incorporate on what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Awesome. Thank you, Nina. Regina.
So this is an easy question for me because I came up with the theme. So I think
that's why I left you for last.
Thank you. I appreciate that because, just what we're doing tonight is a big part of moving the needle toward trust and dialogue. You know, one of the things, I previously was an advocate, right? Outside of state government. You know, I worked for Sierra Club for many years. I was a housing advocate. I've done a lot of things on the activist and advocate side, pushing for change. But I think there is, you know, that inside and outside game that you talked about is a real thing. And having people who've been in varying situations become part of figuring out the solution, I think is critical. And having that link in that conversation and knowing people realizing that they're heard and not just listen to you, I think is critical. So as we work to rebuild trust, things like this conference, you know, I've had a lot of side conversations with people as we started this process. What are we going to include? What are we going to talk about? And I really wanted it to be dialogue. So I think continuing the dialogue to move toward action, because you until you frame what it is you want to change, how do you start on that road? What is your theory of change to get there? So I see this as both an opportunity for us to have dialogue, be open to that. You know, one of the things you always hear is government's not transparent, and government doesn't listen. So, you know, as we've worked on things like enhancing our public participation policy, doing additional ways, you know, some of it is we're building. You know, Mary Ann mentioned that air quality has moved along the continuum for quite some time because they do the most public engagement of any Eagle division. And so, you know, it has been a work in progress, but I feel like we're making progress with the you know, creation of the Environmental Justice Public Advocate Office, with the Clean Water Public Advocate Office. That gives Eagle an additional, you know, arm office that is going out into the community and connecting dots. Because sometimes it's hard. You know, we talked about the different types of people who work in an organization like Eagle, and oftentimes they are scientists, they are technology people, and then you have someone like me. I'm not a scientist. I just really am passionate about the work, and I'm passionate about connecting people and dots. And so when you put someone who's very technical with someone who loves to communicate, I mean, that's what I consider myself, as a communicator, we can help better tell stories, better have conversations. So I feel like that's what the theme is really all about, because we, you know, to get along that continuum, how do we reimagine justice if we've never talked about what justice is, and if we're not going to people where they are? So I think it really gives us an opportunity to continue this building and to work together to the solution. Because I think, you know, there is a proverb, and I know I'm going to mess it up, but if you want to go fast, go along. But I forgot the second half of it. But if you want to get there, go together, or something like that. I know I just messed it up. But the point is, we've got to work together to get to where we're trying to go.
No, I think that's super helpful. And we're getting a lot of questions in, and building again on your last statement, whether it's wrong or right. I understand the intention of the proverb you're trying to bring up. And I think, you know, when you talk about moving slow to go fast, or moving at the speed of trust, that can take a while, particularly around rebuilding trust. And so for someone from looking in the outside in, sometimes the sense of urgency that folks are feeling that are dealing and living in places that are causing them environmental harm, they don't understand that, you know, they can't really understand slow, because it's an imminent threat right now. So can you talk about, you know, again, as we talk about transparency and rebuilding trust and the importance of communication, what are some of the things that people don't see from the outside in that you all are facing, that you all are trying to address to really move on some of these environmental justice issues? Again, with this whole notion that sometimes you have to go slow to move fast, but looking in on the outside, you know, that's hard to accept. So can you share it maybe a little bit, you know, again, what do you want folks to know to really understand some of the internal stuff that you can share, so they can appreciate that y'all are working, but it just might not appear?
So, I'll start and I'm sure others may want to answer this, but one of the things I learned when I became part of state government, I never understood that either, right? As I would advocate for things, why is it taking so long? And Mary Ann can attest to that. I think we met when I was an advocate, right? So I'm at a hearing trying to figure out why it's taking so long to do this or that. And she was very patient with me. And I remember our conversations very well. And I think part of that is there really are, when you hear there are layers of government, there really are. And there are regulations and processes that have to happen. One of the things I always say is, advocacy is about impact. You want to change whatever negative impact there is, and you want to have impact that's going to better your community. At the same time, government needs process. They need to go through whatever they need to go through to get to that. And so oftentimes the data needs to be there, the information needs to be there. And so it is a difficult, transition to think about going from we need immediate impact to how do we get there? But I think what we've learned and what I've seen since I've been in state government and working with, Liesl and Mary Ann and Nina and other folks on the Eagle team and around state government is that folks are willing to answer the call when they need to. When there is a crisis, we will respond to that. However, we also have things that we need to do. And so I talk a lot about integrating environmental justice into what we do and make it how we do it, not an add-on. And I think staff has really been receptive to that. It's just figuring out the how. When you've done things for as long as you've done them in the ways that you've done them, sometimes you can't spin on a dime, but as long as the effort is there. So things like the Interagency and Environmental Justice Response Team that was created, that really brings other state departments to the table, helps us do that. Things like having the Michigan Advisory Council on Environmental Justice brings voice to some of the challenges on the outside, also advises us and helps us. So I'll be quiet on that one. And if there are others that want to chime in, but I think that's part of, why we're doing what we do right now.
So I'm going to chime in, but more on the macro level. And I kind of knew where Regina was likely to go on more of the kind of day-to-day level. And so I think that's really important. Where I'm going to chime in on the macro level is I just want to make 2 points. One is that the work that we do at Eagle is guided by statute and regulations. That's the world that we live in. And my second point is that our opinions don't really matter a lot because we have to do work that's within those statutes. Now, are we able to be creative and move to the best of our ability within that legislative structure? Yes, we want to have that discussion. But there is a role for our work with the legislature, right? In order to figure out how do we have the right umbrella to set the right policy. So one of my favorite examples of this one is everybody's favorite Nestle. So Nestle is now sold and owned by another company whose name is not coming to me at the immediate moment. And Nestle, as everyone knows, is able to withdraw whatever their number of withdrawal is. Sorry, I don't know off the top of my head either. And they pay in the neighborhood of $200 to $300 for that permit. That is set by statute. That is not a decision that Eagle makes. And so we are bound by that statute. We are bound, and the statute says that if they are not having an appreciable impact on the groundwater resource or the water resource in the area, that the permit must be issued. And so it's not a matter of does Liesl want to issue this permit or not. It's a matter of what is written in that statute. Now, are we interested in having conversations about, what are the other opportunities here? Yes, we certainly are. But I think Nestle is one of the ones that always I find very, very interesting because there's a clear statutory structure for that, right? So we'd love to have a bigger conversation about what are our groundwater resources worth in Michigan, and how should that be valued? Because we think of groundwater resources as the 6th Great Lake, and we consider them very precious. That should be considered for both with quantity and quality, the work that we do. So anyway, it's one of my favorite ones to spend a minute explaining to people, because I think that it can get a little bit lost because I think we all as Michiganders love our water. And so the idea that, any entity, and let me say too, that Nestle is like number 70 on that list of withdrawals. There's like a bunch of others that are above them on that list. And so, people will say, well, there were 8,000 comments telling you not to issue that permit. it's not, we don't get to make the decision based on how many comments do we receive. We love your comments. And in many cases, we get comments from the public that allow us to write a better permit, be more protective of the natural resources, and certainly make better decisions on behalf of the community. So we love your comments. We read all of your comments. They are important to the outcome. But again, it doesn't end up in some cases being a binary decision. So
Mhm, mhm.
that's helpful.
Yeah. That's super helpful, and I think gets to one of the questions in terms of constraints. And I think just people even understanding sometimes how the statute constrains what you're able to do. But again, really knowing what's within your power is super important, particularly for those looking in on the outside. Mary Ann?
I was just going to say one quick thing, and this is going to be really casual, but it's kind of what, when you ask the question about what don't people see in terms of what we're doing, there are times where we'll see something come into air quality and our initial reaction is, no way is someone asking to do this, and then you have to kind of take a step back and you say, okay, but they are asking to do this. So now what is our role? What can we push back on? What are the constraints that we're working on? And, I kind of think of it like, is it a balloon at times? You can push your finger through, but you can't quite pop it, but you can sure stretch it pretty far in terms of what we can do to evaluate or review that type of proposal to make sure that we're asking the tough questions, that we're asking, is there more that you could do to improve what you want, what your ask is? Whether that ask is increase emissions or sometimes a location even, and we'll say, yeah, that's not a good location, but we recognize we don't have control over location, but we can ask, and sometimes we'll get favorable responses and sometimes we don't. So those types of conversations go on all the time within our regulatory framework, with our inspectors, with our permit writers, pushing the envelope to say, where can we make change, whether even if it's voluntary, to kind of improve air quality for everyone. And as some of our areas in Detroit, clearly there's a lot of industry there. There are a lot of conversations that go on about maybe there's something different that a facility may want to do, or maybe we can ask for reductions so that we see overall decreases as opposed to increases, or maybe there's more control somebody might add. So those are the kind of conversations, I think, from a practical perspective, that happen all the time.
Mhm.
So I'd like to approach this from a different angle. So what I think of, so I've been with the state 17 years. I've been in different departments, and I think about how our work is so siloed. Lisa talked about, again, Eagle is a regulatory body. So this is how they operate. This is the framework that they have to use. I think there's an opportunity for us as state agencies, and that's why I'm excited that I was a part of the Office of the Clean Water Public Advocate, and we have Regina's office, because we're able to transcend over departments. We're able to look at an issue comprehensively, like look at lead and water. Yeah, we have these set regulatory things that we do within Eagle, but what's the public health implication? How can we work with MDHHS? How can we work with other departments to make sure that we're being impactful? So I think the key is understanding that we have these siloed environments, but we're lucky to have a governor that realized that there needed to be some connectivity and the creation of these offices and other things to help us so that we can be more impactful more quickly.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. There's a question in here, so we're going to take it on another track. I think this is from a young person, and really they're asking, how can we reimagine these difficult conversations that we're having in a way that we're engaging refugees, newcomers, Indigenous youth, and other young people that want to maybe one day be in the positions that you all hold. So how do we begin to not just communicate, but actually engage folks that maybe have been left out of the conversations?
So can I start that one? So during my time, I had the privilege of being able to mentor quite a few students. And I tell you, they bring an energy to the office and to the department that we've been doing this work, and sometimes we get bogged down by some of the red tape, but they bring this new energy and perspective. So I think it's about building mentorship opportunities where we're teaching them the framework, we're giving them that day-to-day path of what they can do, but also learning from them, getting their perspective about what's new out there. I mean, there's some technology that we've never heard of that we can incorporate within our practices. So it's again about creating space for diverse perspectives, mentoring students, creating opportunities for true engagement as we think about the policies and practices that we're doing, the initiatives that we're building. And I think that that's done in a lot of different ways, but we can definitely improve on that all around. But just got really excited when you talked about students, because I love my students. They have been great. They've been helpful in all of our community work. And again, they bring that great energy that keeps us going.
Awesome,
So
thank you.
I couldn't agree more with everything that Nina said, which is typically true. So Nina, just I also think about, I love the energy that students give, and I love looking at it through different eyes. I think that is so helpful. I know for me as an individual, and I think for us as an entity. And to Mary Ann's original point, they are curious and they will say, well, why are you doing it that way? And it's that classic, remember there's a joke about you get the ham and you cut the ends off the ham, and it's like, you just threw away part of the ham. Why do you do that? Well, I do it because my mom did it, and I do it the way my mom did it. And your mom says, well, I did that because my pan was too small for the ham, right? So like, why are we doing these things? Let's really shine a mirror on ourselves and understand why we're doing these things. But the other angle I'd like to take it is that dialogue. Well, two points. The first is, please tell us how to do it better, because you know how we can engage you. So help us engage you. We don't have always the best tools or the best approaches. I want you to tell us how to engage you, because we want to come to you where you're at. I'm very intentional about building this pipeline. It is really important that we take the passion and energy of the youth and work with them, and inspire it and work with it all through school, all through college and whatever level of university, so that we are bringing that next generation in, so that when we're hiring folks, we're bringing in those new perspectives, those diverse perspectives, I hope bringing their own backgrounds and different ways of looking at things, so that we can grow as an agency, and so that we are looking forward to who we are going to be as opposed to who we are now, which is great. We are not denigrating who we are now. I'm really proud of the team that I work with. I'm also looking forward to, how can we build a stronger, better agency? And I think that is all of you helping us understand how can we come to you and talk to you about what we do and get your background and insight and expertise.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to add to that. One of the reasons that if you've participated in other sessions in this conference, it's a combination of, slides, PowerPoints, but a lot of conversation. And I think I received the highest compliment from someone yesterday when they said, it was a younger person, and they said, this conference is great because it's like one long podcast, right? Because there's conversation. And I was like, wow. That's what I wanted, us to be able to have dialogue. People can listen to it, they can engage in it. They don't necessarily have to look at the screen. They can pull it up on their phones. They can be part of the conversation and part of the dialogue. I love the Whova app. I think it provides a real mobile way to engage, which fits that. I would also say that from the perspective of the work that I do on environmental justice, I am constantly asked to speak to students, to speak to student groups, to engage. And that's a really important part of the work, because some of the best research out there and just creative thinking is coming from college students who are seeing this, like I think Lisa Landine said, with fresh eyes. And so, I would reiterate that I think engaging and seeking out, I've never been like shy. I know that's hard to believe, but I've always throughout my career sought out what I wanted to know. And so I think seeking us out and engaging us, because, we get caught up in just doing what we do. And so I think if you reach out to, not just the folks on this panel, but other people in Eagle and in state government, I think that really helps us connect those dots.
Thank you. Thank you. There's a couple of questions that are getting to, as you talk about, as some of you talked about kind of building this pipeline. Also, Nina, to your point, the foundation is super important. And some of the folks are asking, how do you build an infrastructure or a foundation that can still work and keep people first despite political agendas and political parties. So how do you build a structure or agency that continues to work for people, that outlives party changes and all of those things? You know, what are the ways that you can sustain the energy and the prioritization of environmental justice that you have right now at this moment?
So I'll start and others may want to chime in. You know, basically that question is the reason it's so important to integrate environmental justice into how we do what we do. Because this office was created by executive order. So you're right, it could be subjected to, you know, political whims down the road, but it's so much deeper than that, that I think if we're thinking about infusing both equity and environmental justice into how we think about the work, not just because the Office of Environmental Justice Public Advocate or the Office of Clean Water, your public advocate says you should, but you gain an understanding of how it can make your work better. And then sometimes, some ways easier, gives you a path to looking at things differently. You know, that is probably the biggest question. You know, people often say, well, you know, it's taken 2 years and the office is building, and what are you doing? And so much of it is building that foundation to help people within state government be able to think about how they can integrate environmental justice into the work that they do. And that's not an easy or simple thing if things have been done the same way for decades, right? And so that foundation has to be laid, but then we move forward, because folks will say to me, okay, I get it, now how do I do it? And so again, the people who know how to do it are the ones who do their work every day, who know the regulations inside and out from the Eagle perspective, or the other jobs that they do in other departments. And so we're doing things like working on environmental justice training for all state employees. We did a training with all Eagle employees last year just to help level set them in what environmental justice really is. And we've been moving on very intentionally, working within the department to figure out how we infuse it, as Mary Ann talked about. It's not simple, it's not easy. And as Lisa referred to, sometimes you can't change the regulation, but you can change where you can, right? Like, how do you approach it? What do you incorporate? Who do you talk to? What conversations do you have? I know one of the things that Mary Ann also talked about is, although people think the state can change everything, we can't. And sometimes it's a local decision or a federal decision, or, you know, sometimes it's a county decision or a city or a zoning board. You know, how do we not just say it's not us, but also figure out how to help people facilitate the change that they seek, even if we're not the ones who can give it to them.
Does anyone want to respond to that as well, or?
Sure. I think it's a reminder that we are public servants and we need to put people first. You know, I think sometimes, like you mentioned, the political aspect of it is that we're doing things because we are driven in this direction because of an administration or legislators. But if we are centered around putting our communities first, then they will continue to be the reason why we do our work. So what I loved about really working for Eagle is really thinking about the strategic plan, and that planning process of us coming together and looking at the mission and vision and how all of our work feeds into that. I think you have to do that level setting and reminder of how all our work comes together. So I think, again, those are things that we have to keep at the forefront on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and if you don't mind, Dr. J, I don't want to take a ton of time so we can get another question, but Nina's hit the nail on the head. We are public servants, and of the group on this call, you know, Mary Ann and Nina have both been with the state for quite some time. Regina and I are more kind of newcomers and kind of come again folks, if that makes sense. But, you know, Nina and Mary Ann are both fantastic examples of public servants who do put people first. And so, you know, I think we see that example over and over again. Are we perfect at it all the time? Absolutely not, because we are also imperfect humans, and that is just true, and we all are. So, but we are public servants, and so in that vein, we keep people first, and we need to keep that priority there.
No, thank you. And I know we're getting close to time, but there's one more question that I just want to maybe to Mary Ann and Nina, because as I think about air and water, those are huge issues, and some of the concerns that continue to come up is, in the planning process, what someone just alluded to, how are you making sure that you're integrating in kind of a health in all policies approach, or considering health? And I would even extend it to say, how are you actually integrating an environmental justice in all policies approach? So do you have any things that you can either share, or how are you making sure that health and EJ get into the planning and to the policy making that you all are responsible for? And so maybe Mary Ann, if you can start, and then Nina.
Sure. We are, as I said earlier to another question, I think there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that's not really apparent, and we hear you, and we're listening to you when you ask us things, and we're balancing those wants and needs with, that structure that we work in. And like I said, with my balloon example, we're pushing, we're looking, we hear the comments often about additional monitoring, and we make every effort to incorporate that or respond to that where we can. We were able to put a new monitor in the 48217 zip code area. We've invested in, I think Regina is leading this through MAC-EJ, the purple sensor monitors, so we can have some additional sensors. They're not monitors, they're sensors in communities, so we can get more real-time, real experience data. So those are things that we're doing. We hear you when you talk about cumulative impacts, and trust me, that is something that is near and dear to our heart. But as scientists and engineers, our brains immediately start thinking about how do you do that, and we get really technical and really involved, and we start thinking of limitations. But in doing that, we also think of opportunities. So because we, maybe you see this as maybe like we're putting up roadblocks. We're not. I think what we're doing is taking ourselves down a road, knocking down the roadblock, saying we can go that way, we can go that way, we can go that way. That may not be a way that we need to go. So we're kind of exploring all those ideas. And we are looking at cumulative impacts, and we're looking at what we can do. And we're starting it in air quality, saying, what could we do with regard to cumulative impacts? Start with air, and then come up with some structure or framework, and then let's build it to the larger department. But work with what we have, and work in some ways what we don't have, but what we think we can get to. So those are some of the things that we're doing in air. And that I'm hopeful we'll reach for the throughout the department that will challenge us and will make us again incorporate and think. We don't even have to think about it, because it just becomes inherent in what we do every day.
Thank you.
So when I think of incorporating, environmental justice and public health, I think about the key is collaboration. It's about having all those players at the table. And I know I mentioned this before, but we have to think about all those different expertise and all the different, authority that they have and how it can be impactful in community. Lisa mentioned before, EGLE is a regulatory body. And so they have to really follow those EPA regulations. But what are creative ways that we can make sure that we have that public health lens? And that's having our public health partners at the table. How do we make sure we have that environmental justice lens? That's having our community partners at the table. That's making sure that's the foundation of everything that we're doing. We have that equity lens, and we're making sure we incorporate that within our practices and policies. So I would just say, overall, the key is collaboration and connection. I mean, we have to make sure that we have everyone at the table as we're making these decisions, and we have to make sure that we're being informed by diverse voices. So I think that's the key. Water is huge. And I know in starting the job, the first thing I did was Google water in Michigan, and it wasn't a pretty sight. And so that was kind of the foundation of what I wanted to build on, rebuilding trust, transparency. And it starts with just listening. So that two-way communication that I talked about, supporting community efforts, not going into a community and telling them, hey, I think this is what you need based on what we know here, but really having those conversations that are uncomfortable, very uncomfortable at times, but honest, and hearing these are the barriers we have, and this is why this isn't working, and taking that back and reworking them. So it's really about all those different approaches, but the key is just diverse voices, collaboration, and connecting so that we have a greater impact.
My goodness, thank you so much. It reminds me, Nana, of one of my mentors that said, if you are not at the table, you are probably on the menu. So again, thank you all for this great conversation. And again, for those that had questions that we didn't get to, feel free to reach out to anybody on this panel, because again, in terms of communication and transparency, this is what it's about in the best format that we could do virtually. So with that, I think I will turn it back to Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you, all of you. This was a really great discussion, and I was definitely listening, taking notes as usual, and very inspired by the conversation. I know we're over time, so I just want to remind everyone to join us tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. The conversation continues. It's actually a great segue, because in the morning, the first topic of conversation is Real Talk, Local Governments and Environmental Justice. So I think you heard a lot about that today. We kind of touched on it. We're going to dig a little deeper tomorrow morning. So I hope to see all of you there. And again, really appreciate you joining us this evening, these evening sessions. I know if everybody was here all day, like a lot of us were, they were probably like, when is dinner? And then we were talking about pork, and I'm sure everybody's hungry. So we'll let you all go, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your night.